Hello, everyone. Welcome to our fourth consecutive VMUG webinar. Very, very pleased to have you guys on board. Eyal, I'm just waiting for the slides to forward. Is that something that you can do for me? There we go. So one of the reasons that we are such big supporters of these VMUG webinars is we really believe in taking an objective approach, right? And that's very consistent with my own background. While I'm Chief Strategy and Marketing Officer of Reduxio, I've also been a professor for 20 years at MIT, the Technical University of Denmark, and the Holt School of Business. So our intention is to make this webinar and all the webinars we will continue to do to your community to be extremely objective and rich in content. And I think we've got a very, very good subject on hand today. So I'll spend just a few minutes, and only a few minutes, introducing Reduxio. And the only reason that we feel a need to do this is we got some feedback at the end of our last webinar where people wished we'd actually spent more time on Reduxio. But the primary focus of today's talk is to have my colleague, Ronen Sde-Or, talk about the evolution of virtual machine backup, and we'll get into significant technical detail, which I know is very important to the VMUG community. And then I will facilitate a fireside chat with Francis Leong, who's the IT manager at One Workplace, a very interesting business based on the West Coast, and we'll get into both the IT infrastructure and Francis's own perspective on VM backup. So let me very quickly just tell you a little bit about Reduxio. Let me just introduce both Ronen and then Francis first. So Ronen is our lead technical marketing engineer. He's very much focused on solutions architecture and documentation. He has spent 20 years in IT. He has spent the last 13 years in the backup and storage industry. So he brings a significant amount of technical depth of expertise with him. He spent the 8 years prior to joining Reduxio as a solution engineer in IBM storage and storage software business. And then Francis Leong, one of our earliest customers, has been also very active in managing IT organizations across a wide range of different types of companies. He joined One Workplace as a systems engineer and has been promoted, is now running the IT department. He's responsible for overseeing their operations for 3 physical sites. He was previously a network engineer at Echelon, and I'm looking forward to a very good fireside chat with Francis. All right, so let me now just maybe spend a few minutes talking about who we are as a company and set up the discussions with both Ronen and with Francis. So many of us have fantasized about the ability to time travel, and we've enjoyed a lot of really great movies like Back to the Future. But it turns out that Reduxio actually built a time machine. And as the company was being born, the questions that the founders asked was, given this extraordinary complexity that we're seeing in storage infrastructure, giving this increasing lack of confidence in our ability to recover data in any reasonable time frame or in any reasonable way, perhaps it makes sense to go back to first principles and think about what is the real significant use case or set of use cases that storage customers need today. And it led to a very unique architecture. And the underlying architecture is what we call the time operating system. Okay. It brings together everything, including global data reduction, active tiering, as well as instant data recovery and advanced mobility. So all in a very uniquely unified, efficient enterprise flash-based architecture. So let's talk a little bit about what this means and why it is relevant for today's discussion, right? So again, the aim of the company was to design the most efficient architecture to allow you to manage data. So we invented the storage operating system called TimeOS, and what it essentially does is it tracks every I/O with rich metadata, which allows a completely different way of managing, accessing, protecting, and moving data. Okay? And one of the things we've eliminated is the need to wait to get your data. So we've moved to 1 second RTO and 1 second RPO for backup and recovery. Okay? So one of the most significant features within TimeOS is our backdating feature, and it instantly allows you to recover your applications from any data loss event. It could be a software failure, it could be a cyber attack, simply by just cloning or reverting volumes from the past. And in so doing, we have essentially obsoleted something that has been around for over 20 years and has not been innovative, and that is snapshotting. So this is a very important part of the TimeOS, okay? Another new capability that we began shipping with our version 3, which we announced at end of June, is what we call no restore. And what no restore allows you to do is to collapse silos. So you're able to consolidate both primary as well as secondary storage, backup, disaster recovery, copy data management, and cloud connectivity all into a single solution. So what no restore does, it allows you to very efficiently protect data either to a remote Reduxio appliance, to third-party storage, to a private or public cloud, and it provides nearly instantaneous recovery for even the largest data sets. Okay? So if we could go to the next slide. So how has the market reacted? Well, the market has reacted very favorably. We've got over 150 customers around the world across a wide range of industries that have adopted the Reduxio time operating system in our HX550, including some very significant names in Europe, Bookings.com, and in the United States, Siemens, the California Public Utility Commission, and a large number of companies in manufacturing, in software development, in the education sector, in state and local government, as well as in professional services. So more important, though, relative to, as we go to the next slide, what matters more is not what we say. What matters is what key opinion leaders have to say. I'm assuming most of you know the industry analyst firm known as Forrester. They published a report that literally just went out on the wires last week. And I know that you folks can read as well as I can, but the name of the report is 3 Vendors Disrupting Integrated Storage, Secondary Storage, and Data Protection. And the punchline says that Reduxio makes it easy, effective, and efficient for enterprises to integrate the storage landscape for their business apps. And it's on a path to integrate data protection and copy data management capabilities into a platform that provides primary storage for applications. Okay? So this literally was published last week. I'd encourage you, if this is of interest, to go to the Reduxio website and download the full report. Next slide. Another industry analyst firm that I'm sure you know very well, IDC. IDC independently published a report in June of this year that was coincident with Reduxio's release of our V3 product. And there was a lot of consistency between the way that Phil Goodwin, who runs the storage practice at IDC, and Navan Chabra, who was the primary author of the Forrester report, had to say. What Phil Goodwin identified is that Reduxio was pioneering a new category called unified data storage. So we're bringing together data storage, data management, and protection in a single platform, okay, in order to manage both primary and secondary data. And his punchline is it's evident that Reduxio has many of the capabilities that are built in to construct a data protection infrastructure. And goes on to talk about this time operating system, specifically backdating allows instant 1 second granularity. And then many of you probably know who I believe to be one of the most technically competent IT infrastructure journalists, Chris Malore with the Register. Chris has written repeatedly about Reduxio over the last year, and in a very consistently favorable way. Reduxio, the startup that stores data in unique index tagged and timestamp chunks, has now recently introduced its version 3 software with both unified primary and secondary data storage, with built-in replication for use cases like disaster recovery, provides copy data management, allowing to restore data with near zero RPO, RTO, and enables data to migrate seamlessly across systems. We're very, very big believers in capturing testimony from our users because we understand that you folks live in a world where there's zero room for error. So if you go to Reduxio.com, you'll see a resources page with a wide number of different customer testimonials and video, use cases, press releases, articles that have been written, as well as on a significant new site called IT Central Station. There are 4 quotes here. The upper left-hand quote came from a customer in the public sector who was able to recover from a ransom attack in well less than an hour, in fact 20 minutes, with just a 2-minute data loss. In the upper right-hand corner, we have a review from Gordon College talking about how we were able to help map processes and data migration. In the lower left, we have a quote from the VP of IT of the venture capital fund. And on the right-hand side, we've got a quote from the principal architect at a very sophisticated cybersecurity software firm that Gartner has described as one of the most sophisticated DevOps shops that they've ever encountered. Next slide, please. Again, all about trying to provide relevant content. You can go to our website and on demand dial down any one of a number of recent webinars. The one that we did in September was focused on protection and securing virtualized infrastructure. The one that we recently did in October was on managed VDI infrastructure, how to handle VDI bootstraps, and we'll be talking about DevOps and providing an DevOps shop on the 6th of December. So now if we can move to the next slide, I'd like to introduce one more time Ronen Sde-Or, who's going to take us through a 15 or 20 minute talk, the evolution of virtual machine backup. Ronen, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mike. Hi, everyone. My name is Ronen. First of all, I want to thank you for joining this webinar. And what I'm going to talk about in the next 20 minutes or so is basically the evolution of VMware backup. I'm going to talk about the capabilities. So I'm going to talk about the technology that enables it. I'm not going to talk about specific vendors and how they implemented it and so on. So it's going to be very generic and really about the technology and what it enables us to do, where it was, where we are now, and where it's going. So we'll talk about, the move from physical to virtual machines, and then the first consolidated backup. We'll talk about the VADP, which is what's currently being used. Copy data management, which I'm sure that you all heard about. VIO, which is quite new. We'll touch more about it. And then really 2 slides about Reduxio and how it all comes together. So first of all, I hope that your backup policy is better than this guy's ability to backup his data. So let's start actually with how we were before we had VMware. So we had a bunch of physical servers with a backup server, and we actually had a backup agent on each of those physical servers. Once we moved to virtualization, we actually moved our entire physical servers into virtual machines. So all those, in theory, what we should have done is actually take all those backup agents and put them on each of the VMs. That was the first one, actually, step 1, when moving to virtualization. And the benefits were actually, it worked, you don't need to do anything. That's, I think, the first approach to most of the people, but it also brought a lot of challenges with it. So first of all, now we ran multiple servers on a single host, and this created a lot of issues with resources. The other thing is that if you had to restore a VM, you actually had to go and rebuild the OS, and then restore the data. And of course, the administration was much more complicated, and the whole idea of moving to VM is actually to simplify the infrastructure. Let's talk a little bit about the VCB, the Consolidated Backup from VMware, and some history. I'll start with the history, and I want to ask you, and unfortunately you cannot actually answer it, but does anyone know what this is, what are loading on the plane here? I'll give you a few seconds. And the answer is actually, that was the first hard drive by IBM in 1956. It weighed about 2,000 pounds, and it had a 5 megabyte capacity. So things definitely came up a long way here. So let's talk about really VMware consolidation, consolidated backup, the VCB, and what it brought to this table. So the idea was, as I said, we don't want to keep those backup agents on each of the VMs. So VMware came up with a VCB, which actually was a single point to offload all those backups. And it was introduced actually in 2006, so about 3 years or something like that after VMware started the server virtualization at ESX3. And the idea was to actually create a snapshot of the data, move the entire data to a secondary storage, and then back it up through a proxy. That was the original process. And the benefits were, of course, no. We consolidated all the backup. We didn't need to have these backup agents on each of those virtual machines. We finally had consistent VMware snapshots. So it did integrate with VSS to create consistent snapshots, and it offloaded the impact from the production server. And that's what that was part of the challenges that we're talking about, having the agents on each of the VMs. The challenges with that was, first of all, we still had a lot of resource utilization being done there. We required quite a large staging area because we actually had to copy all those snapshots to a secondary storage. And it also caused it to be very slow because the copy took a lot of time, and then we had to actually copy to the proxy server. In 2009, about 3 years after VCB was introduced, VMware started something that is called vStorage API for Data Protection, VADP. And this is actually what majority of the backup software are still using today. So about 8 years later, this is still being used. So it was introduced in vSphere 4, and the main differences here is that they introduced a single step copy from the source to the target. So we didn't have to copy those snapshots to a secondary storage. The other thing that was introduced is change block tracking. Change block tracking actually creates a bitmap of the blocks between the previous backup and the current backup. And most vendors today actually use that to back up only those change blocks. In general, that's about 3 to 5% change per day, roughly. Again, that's a number I like to use. And it also enabled file-level backup and restore a single file, actually, for Linux guest OSs. And how does it work? So we have the VMs sitting on top of the hypervisor. In the middle, we have here the VMDKs that actually resides within the data store. Most vendors, will have a backup server and a proxy server. It can be one, it can be multiple servers. Again, it will depend on the different vendor. And the way it works is actually talk to the vCenter, create a VMware snapshot, and then we actually just copy the CBT, only the change blocks are actually being uploaded to the backup server. That way, the backup is much, much smaller than full backup. Once this is done, the snapshots, the VMware snapshots are being deleted. And that's because we don't want to keep them for too long, because it does create a load on the VMs. So the benefits for this method, and again, that's what is being used now by most vendors, is a single step copy, as I mentioned earlier, a more efficient backups using CBC. I can tell that I was working with a customer that had about 8,000 VMs across 4 different sites, and the change rate that I saw there was somewhere between 1 to 5%. So 3 to 5% is really a number that I like to use. Some VMs you'll see much lower change rate. And file-level backup and restore for Linux OSs. The challenges that we have with the VADP is actually that there are 2 places where VMware are being stopped. First of all, that when we initiate the backup of the VM, we actually create a VMware snapshot. This means that the VM is being quiesced. If it's a very, very busy machine, this might fail, and I can tell that I was working with, again, another customer, and they had an issue with very busy database servers, Oracle servers, that the quiescer would just fail on them. In some cases, by the way, I did run into cases where we found out that there was a problem between the Red Hat kernel and VMware, but there were just cases where the machine was too busy when we tried to quiesce it, and it failed. The other place where this hits the performance of the VM is actually once we remove the snapshot. Once you create a VMware snapshot, from that point until you remove it, all the changes, all the writes are actually going into a transaction log file, I would call it. When you delete the snapshot, VMware will try to consolidate all those changes back into the VM. At this point, it's trying to consolidate them as fast as it can, so it does use a lot of resources to do that. One side note about that, some vendors have implemented hard snapshots, and it does help with the second stun by the way that you create the VMware snapshot. The minute it's created, instead of waiting until you copy all the data to the backup server, it just creates a hardware snapshot that is usually very, very quick. Usually takes less than a second. This means that the size of the transaction log file is actually smaller, so when you need to commit it back to the VM, you have less data to commit, so it doesn't consume as much resources as if the file was bigger. Some other challenges, it does require you to carefully plan those backups because you don't want to start too many VMs at once. It does create a load on the ESX host, on the network, and so on. And you need to schedule the snapshots. There are still snapshots, so you need to schedule them to fit your RPO and RPO. So you can do it every few hours. Most customers I was working with, it was still either twice a day, once a day. I had a few customers that were doing that even 4 times a day, but usually that's what I saw with my customers. Some of the restore capabilities, and again, it will depend on the different vendors and how they implemented it. Single file level restore, file indexing, so you can actually look for a single file and find the different versioning of the file. Application aware, so in most cases, they will talk to, they will understand if it's a database, SQL, Oracle, and so on, and enable some granular restore tables. VM instant access using mount, so you don't need to restore the entire VM in order to access it and pull single files from there. Instant restore, as I mentioned, hardware integration, snapshots, and restore can be done either to a local site, to a secondary site, or to the cloud. Again, those are things that different vendors provide different capabilities here. Forward. Secondary storage and copy data management. And copy data management or copy data problem is a $50 billion issue. And what is it? We all have our production data, but usually we keep many copies of this data. So usually we have snapshots of the data, backup on top of the snapshots, and then we have replicas of the data to a secondary site, and then we have environments for dev and test and analytics and so on. So we just keep a lot of data, and we keep multiple copies of that, and this costs a lot of money. According to IDC, 45 to 60% of storage today is actually copies of the data. And when it comes to databases, the problem is even bigger. 82% of the customers have 10 or more copies of their databases. And that's because the DBA usually doesn't trust the backup admin, so they also create a dump of the database, and this dump is being backed up because nobody knows where it is, and it's being replicated, so now we actually made this problem even bigger. So the idea behind copy data management solutions is actually to have your primary storage talk to a secondary storage, which the vendor provides. And the first backup is actually to copy all the data from the primary storage. From that point on, you only copy differences between the different snapshots from the backup time. And the secondary storage knows how to dig up the data, knows how to create clones, and some other nice features, integrate with VMware, with other applications. So it reduces the total capacity that is required to manage all those copies, because it dedups all the data, and you need less storage for that. The real issue with those things is that usually we are talking about silos. So you still have your primary storage that runs the production data, and you have the copy data that resides on a secondary storage. This actually creates infrastructure complexity. You also need to copy all the data between the primary storage and the secondary storage, so it creates some more load on the network. It makes the operation of those more complex because you still need to plan and understand exactly where your primary data is, where the secondary storage, what are the capabilities, what needs to be where. It drives costs up because usually those secondary storage, although they are usually slower, so they use not tier one, I would say, it's not a tier one storage. The software that comes with it actually drags lots of costs with it. And the RPO and RTO are still suboptimal because you are still creating snapshots. It's still, you will still do this backup every few hours to your secondary storage. Last thing I wanted to talk about technology that actually started with vSphere 6 update 1 is something that's called VIO, and there are some companies that are also doing block level tracking for replication and data protection. So what is VIO? VIO is actually a filtering framework that was introduced in vSphere 1, and it enables different vendors to, they call it two things, so to manipulate a copy of the blocks that are going to the VMs. What does it mean? Without VIO, the way that the write goes is actually the VM will actually go to the vSCSI device and then go through several layers of the kernel, and then it will be written to the physical device. What VIO brings to the table is actually the write will go, again, to the vSCSI, go to the kernel, but before it's actually going to be written to the physical device, it's going back through the user world to an IO filter. Over there, vendors can actually implement currently two things, either caching or replication. That's currently the only two things that are being supported at this stage by VMware. Caching means that they can decide to put a few blocks, for example, on faster storage, SSDs, and so on, or replication, capture the IO and replicate it to a secondary site. The benefits, since we capture each IO, every IO that is going to the system, it does minimize the RPO. The challenges is very few vendors are actually using that. And I'm sure that most of you didn't hear about it or are not currently implementing solutions that are based on that. And the implementation of SCAN will depend on different vendors. So it's not something that you have VMware, you benefit from all of it. VMware provides a framework, and the vendor will need to implement something. Okay, so let's talk about Reduxio very quickly. And in Reduxio, as Mike said, we're actually a storage device. But we looked at all those challenges and all the benefits that those different solutions provided, and we came up with a box that actually solves those issues. So we want to integrate the primary storage and the secondary storage. If you remember the copy data management, where you had two different silos, we actually provide you a single box that is doing both primary and secondary. This means also that we don't need to copy data between different boxes. If you do want to move the data to a secondary side, we actually optimize this data because we keep everything in our format. And we do not need to integrate with the application or the host in order to create those backups. So we can still create a quiet backup or not, it's up to you. But the same benefits that you can get with the bio, we actually provide it internally within our storage. And how do we do that? Mike talked about it briefly earlier. We actually offer 1 second RPO because we also capture every write that goes into the box. And we converge, as I said, the primary and secondary storage. We actually provide you a way to create clones and present them in dedupe and compressed way. So we actually have all those features within the primary storage. And we enable you to do instant application and data migration between sites. We like to call it data teleporting. And that's those features are very, very unique to the Reduxio storage. And that's it. Thank you very much.
All right, Ronen, that was absolutely great. Thank you so much for that. And we're going to certainly have time for questions and answers at the end of the session. But I now want to transition to a fireside chat with our featured user today, Francis Leong, who is the IT manager of One Workplace. Francis, thanks for taking time. I know you've got 3 operations that you're managing, so I appreciate you carving out some time to help us educate the VMUG community today. It would be great if you could just start off by telling us a little bit about your business and some of your internal customers.
So One Workplace, we design workspaces and office spaces. So our solution helps transform companies and their culture, their behavior by encouraging collaboration, fostering creativity, and promoting productivity. And at the end goal, we try to do that through innovations. So as a one-shop stop, we are the only company that creates engaging workspaces through the integration of architecture, furniture, and our expertise in technology.
That's great. And I know that this is an incredibly significant topic, right? The entire notion of optimizing the workspace to enhance productivity and drive innovation. You guys got some, the who's who of Silicon Valley in the Bay Area, right? Google is a customer and Salesforce.com. Can you tell us about some of the other customers that most of our audience would have heard of? Because I know it's a very impressive group.
So there's quite a few, from little companies to large companies, Apple being a company, Google, as you mentioned, Salesforce. If you can think of a startup, many of the startups, they use One Workplace to help them design their workspace.
Yeah, that's great. So Francis, tell us now, so you've been on board for a few years. What does your IT infrastructure look like today?
So we are a Windows and Mac shop. I mean, we are primarily Windows. We have, 20% or so are Macs. We run Cisco for routing and switching. We have Dell for servers. We're 100% VMware, and then we use Reduxio as our storage platform.
Okay. And on any given day, how many virtual servers are you guys running?
So at our headquarters, we run over 50 VMs.
Okay. But you're now managing 3 different sites, right?
We actually have 5 sites now.
Okay.
So we've added a couple of more sites. The latest site that we added is in the Philippines.
Wow. Okay, so it's a great way to set up my next question, which is, what are some of the biggest data storage and management challenges, and how have you prepared for them, especially with not just a multi-site, but also now multi-continent data storage infrastructure? So how have you thought about and how have you prepared to address some of these challenges, which continue to grow and become more and more difficult?
Right. So, as we added the Philippines office, we're really a 24-hour shop now. And for us, uptime is critical, right? And as a design firm, we have over 15 terabytes of CAD data. And the challenge for us is to be able to store the data and then access it in a quick way. And we've looked at the cloud, and unfortunately, some of the data sizes we have, some of the renderings that we do, it's just too big. We can't sync all the data to our users, right? And so we have to keep it local. And so that in itself presents, a backup challenge as well. And in addition, we have 7 terabytes of Exchange data. And we are also a Veeam customer, but unfortunately, we're finding that as our data grows, the backup windows becomes longer and longer, right? And so we've come to a point where we can't meet our backup goals, especially for Exchange and for our CAD files. It takes an enormous amount of time to do a full backup now. And even as we do backups, it impacts our network, right? So moving forward, we are utilizing Reduxio's volume replication feature for these types of backups.
Okay. And when you think about what Ronen shared with us, what's your reaction? What are your areas of sort of alignment, or even maybe where you might challenge Ronen? Is there anything specific that he said that you'd like to comment on?
So one thing that I really love about Reduxio is the ability to recover a volume very quickly. So in terms of files, losing files, losing an Exchange database, or even something simple like a file deletion that happened half an hour ago. Before I would say, what, the best thing I could do for you is recover it, an hour ago. But, during that half hour, those were the changes that they made, right? They didn't need the file an hour ago. They really needed it half an hour ago. So before Reduxio, I couldn't really give that to them. Now I can. I can offer that to the users, right? And a lot of times, to do, I don't know if you're experienced with Veeam and how Veeam works, but to do an Exchange recovery, especially if the database is about, let's say 6 months ago, it's a real challenge, right? You got to pull the data and you got to wait for it to read through the databases, and it's going to take a few hours. So instead, with Reduxio, we just clone the volume back to 6 months ago. Use Veeam to mount the database and read the database directly, and we're able to get the data in like half an hour now. So instead of a few hours, we can get it in 30 minutes, right?
No, and that's great. That's exactly what the Forrester and the IBC. Yeah. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Francis, please.
Yeah, so to me, that's just magical, right? To the user, they don't really care. But to me, I've worked on storage for a long time, and that's a great advantage for us, right? To be a flexible company to serve the users in a much better way.
Absolutely. And again, this is exactly what the Forrester and the IBC reports talk about is Veeam has done great. There's no question. They've got a huge user base, but at the same time, as Navan Chabra, as Forrester says, it takes heroic effort sometimes to go be able to get your data. And that's obviously the piece that you're talking about right now. Let's switch gears briefly, right? And with all of these incredible cyber attacks that we're seeing in the news on a regular basis, and obviously you're talking about CAD drawings and a lot of unique IP, and you're working with some very sophisticated clients. What are the big data protection challenges that you've been facing, and how do you address those today?
So some of the challenges we have is if we wanted some way to easily replicate data to an offsite location, being able to have the ability to have automated snapshots. We don't have to create, a policy for this volume, a policy for that volume. We just want something automated, right? So with Reduxio, we can say, okay, we can create a snapshot that's automated, and pretty much all the snapshots are automated, right? And that's the beauty. We have monthly data, we have weekly data, we have hourly data, we have seconds data. So if we really needed to get our data, we have it, and we just have a peace of mind that, you know what, if we need the data, we have it in the storage, and we can always get it back, right? I mean, that's our peace of mind.
Yeah, no, that's great. And you know, friends, when I last saw you, it was, I believe it was back in May, June timeframe at your offices, and, you know, we had come in to do a usability test with you. And I do remember you mentioning how, you know, even some of your more junior, you know, IT team members, you know, were up and running with Reduxio very, very quickly, right? It didn't take any real time for them to become proficient enough to be able to sort of jump in and help manage data storage. You know, so that's clear. You've already mentioned one or two things. The granularity is important, and the ability to get back to exactly when, you know, the user needed data. Anything else that was missing in your environment before we started working with you guys?
Right. So, I mean, I've used a lot of storage before, and when I joined one workplace, I inherited a staff that didn't have any storage experience at all. I didn't send them to training. I didn't send them to any other vendor training. But with the few hours they spent with the SC, with Reduxio, and they were able to understand and set up Reduxio. And the amazing part was, you know, we purchased a second Reduxio about 8 months later, and they were able to do it. And that was incredible to me. I was amazed because they remembered how to do it, and that ease is incredible, right? I mean, to be able to go into the interface and it's very intuitive. That, you know, I loved it. I mean, I loved it for them, I loved it for me, and I loved that it's so easy to use that they actually remember how to do it.
Wow, that's great. So one or two last questions. I'm going to open it up to the audience, but again, you know, important part of the discussion today that Ronen brought was sort of the history of VM backup, right? And as you said, you're running just 50 virtual machines now at your headquarters location. How do you think about VM backup and what's next for you when you're thinking about backing up VMs?
So for
anything specific, like Bio, for example, and the adoption of something like that? What looks like a logical path for you to take going forward on backing up VMs?
So for VMs, I really need pretty much instantaneous backup, right? I would like.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of vendors, they don't offer, or some do now, basically a continuous type of backup. So for us, I mean, you can't really lose a system and say, you know what, I can recover it for you an hour ago or maybe from yesterday, you know, especially for our ERP system. I mean, the transactions that go on from our websites, even internally for generating a quote, I mean, some of those things we can't recover. I mean, we can't recover it easily, and we can't replicate that kind of transaction, right? And so we have to minimize data loss. I don't know how another vendor can minimize data loss. I mean, you can throw some software packages on top and run it in a different way. So then now you're running another software package, and you have to deal with a lot of replication among all the different VMs you have, right? I mean, it's great that Reduxio, you can just do it through the volume level, right? And if you want to recover it, recover it.
Mm-hmm. All right, no, that's great. So last question, we'll turn over to questions, is you're sitting in Silicon Valley, and so you're sort of sitting in the center of the you know, the high-tech universe. You've got some of the most demanding customers on the planet with Google and Apple and Salesforce and a lot of very fast-moving startups. So you're seeing things before most of our audience probably is, right? Because trends start there and they propagate out. What's next on the horizon for you and your IT infrastructure? Anything that you can share with and help educate our audience today?
So I think data is such an important I would say, a commodity for a company, right? I mean, that's the
Yes.
bread and butter
Yeah.
for the company.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of trend is going to the cloud or going to hosting. But you know what? You lose a lot of speed if you do that, right? You also lose a lot of
Yeah.
flexibility. I mean, with our
Yeah.
offices, I mean, we have a lot of data that's real time, and we can't
Mm-hmm.
wait for the data to be pulled from the cloud, right? And we have data
Right.
that's replicated real time between the offices, so the offices can access the
Yeah.
data pretty instantaneously.
Yeah.
And without a successful storage vendor to help achieve those goals, I mean, I would say you wouldn't
Yeah.
be able to move as fast as you be able to, right? So, I mean, the cloud is
Okay.
great, but I don't think the
Yeah.
cloud solves all the problems.
I got it. Okay. And so again, you're making very informed decisions based on the unique requirements of your business and the SLAs that you need to be able to meet to satisfy internal customers. So, it's very, very consistent with certainly what both Forrester and IDC have written, over the last several months. So, no, that's great, Francis, and I appreciate, again, you're taking the time out to join us. What I'd like to do now is I'd like to now open it up to our audience, and we're ready to receive some questions. So looking for, any questions coming into the chat window at this point for either Francis from One Workplace or from Ronen from Reduxio, please. All right, here's a question. So Veeam introduced restores directly from different vendors' SAN storage snapshots recently. There is an integration with Reduxio TimeOS planned for easy file level mail restores, etc. Ronen, can you address that?
Sure. So we currently work with Veeam to integrate the solution, the snapshots that they are pushing with our systems. It's not there yet. You can definitely use Veeam with Reduxio. You might just need to do things a bit differently, just like what Francis said. You might actually find that it's easier to expose any point in time that you want to Veeam and do a single image recovery, for example. So the integration with the snapshots is not there yet, but we can definitely work together with Veeam and provide you the same capabilities as you get from other vendors.
Thank you, Ronen. Any other questions coming in through the chat window? Okay. So is the 1 second recovery time objective achieved using CDP, Ronen?
So yes and no. CDP usually uses a write splitter that sits in the I/O path, and it allows you actually to capture every write, redirect one copy to the secondary storage and one to the primary. What we do is actually better. We actually do everything within Reduxio. So every write that goes into Reduxio, we actually timestamp it so we know how to get back to that specific point in time. So it is in a way CDP, but much more efficient way of doing that.
All right, that's great. So I think that I'm waiting for a few more questions to get pushed toward me. Okay, so another one, I think this is going to be for Ronen, but at the same time, Francis, please feel free to jump in with your own perspective. Can Reduxio do backup to the cloud?
So yes, Reduxio has the ability to push backup, so incremental changes to S3 interface, private or public cloud. On top of that, of course, you can push it to another iSCSI device or another Reduxio box anywhere else on the secondary side.
Okay, thank you, Ronen. And here's a question for you, Francis. What other vendors did you evaluate before you wound up partnering with Reduxio?
So I was a customer of Peer before, a customer of Nimble, and I was a customer of Dell as well.
Okay, and maybe the logical follow-on is sort of what was missing, and I think you probably alluded to some of these earlier, but was there anything specific missing that caused you to transition? Because these can sometimes be pretty significant decisions to transition away from, incumbents. Anything more specific about each of those three that led you to a move?
On the Dell side, it was definitely a performance issue. So we used Compellent before, and we used EqualLogic, and performance was really an issue. On the EqualLogic side, I was actually able to push data that actually killed the storage. And so after that, I said, no, we can't use this box anymore. We used Nimble at my last job. Although I would say the customer story around marketing is great, but as you use Nimble, the platform was just really slow. And Peer is great. I don't have anything bad to say about Peer, except the price is really high, right? If you want to use Peer, go ahead. And the problem is, one is price. Two is some of the features, in terms of snapshotting. They can't go back, right? And some of the features I was asking them about, it's not automated. They were like, yeah, you can run that through a command line. You can build your own shell and write your own program through our API to do that. And I'm like, I don't have time to do that, right?
Right.
That was the other issue.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Francis. All right. Waiting for one last question, I think. Okay. So I'm going to push this one back to Ronen. Is consistency across multiple volumes and VMs implemented?
So yes, the Reduxio is actually a storage box, and all the volumes that reside within the box actually synchronize with time. So they all synchronize with the time of the box, or actually MCP server, to get consistent across all the volumes natively. There is no need to create any consistent groups between volumes or anything like that. You just roll back to the specific second in time you need, and we cover everything you need from there.
All right, and Francis, your perspective, because I imagine you can comment on this from the perspective of using the product.
Right. So for us, when we need to roll back, we just roll back the volume. And if we need a test instance, let's say for our ERP system, we want to test code, we just restore our ERP that maybe a couple of minutes ago, and we test our code against our ERP. So our data is really, to us, very live when we test, right?
Yeah.
And we can do it very quickly.
Okay. All right. Well, listen, we're going to keep our commit to keeping this on time. To our audience, we hope that you found the content from our two technical subject matter experts to be educational. Thank you so much for joining us. This entire webinar will be archived from the Reduxio website starting in about 24 hours. We invite you to come and look at some of the previously archived webinars. We ask you to come back again and join us in early December for our next VMUG webinar, specifically focused on an inside view of DevOps. So this is Mike Grandinetti, Chief Marketing and Strategy Officer with Reduxio, thanking you for your time and wishing you a great rest of the day. Take care.